Okay, so with that, we're gonna turn this over to Addie to do a demo, and take it away, Addie.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. Thanks for the intro, and welcome everybody. I am going to start sharing my screen here, and you should see the assessment dashboard within HealthCheck for Azure pop up here. As I move along, certainly if have any questions, feel free to send those in, and then if there's any latency with the connection, if you could send that in as well. That way I'll know if I should slow down. But this is the assess dashboard, right? And the idea here is to kind of project what the TCO is going to be, show what the performance will look like for the environments that are being assessed, and help build that business case, right? To either become an Azure customer or increase your footprint within Azure for the things that are currently on premises. And again, this is where the agents are going to collect the system and application level data. This is where we're taking that system level data, identifying what types of machines are out there, and then projecting those into Azure. So first thing you'll notice here is the annual cost in the green circle here. And that cost is going to be further broken down into the compute, storage, and network costs. You'll see here with these two tables that we're currently looking at 20 VMs and 6 physical servers, and then, like I said, projecting those into Azure. Now, to the left here, underneath the Microsoft logo, you'll see that we're currently in hardware pay-as-you-go. So pay-as-you-go, obviously, the month-to-month pricing plan within Azure, and then hardware is actually hardware mapping. Right, so this is going to reflect the kind of lift and shift methodology and just do a one-to-one mapping between what your clients currently have on-prem and the VM within Azure that closely mirrors them. So, for example, VM A has raw compute horsepower X, memory Y allocated to its storage Z, that sort of thing. We'll just find the closest match in that regard. At this point, we are not looking at any of the usage data that we're actually collecting and right-sizing anything. That comes next, right underneath the hardware mapping. You'll see that there is an option for workload mapping, and this is where we're actually right-sizing all of the machines in Azure. And the way we do that is we're collecting that system-level data, disk I/O, network I/O, CPU usage, memory usage, things of that nature, and we'll compare. And based on our kind of default performance thresholds and the benchmarking that we do within Azure, so there's no publicly available cloud benchmarks, right? So it can be very hard to project performance and really find that best fit configuration. And what we're going to do is actually automate that process, and this way, again, you install the agents for 2 weeks, and then the best fit configuration so the client can get the performance that they need at the lowest possible cost. There is another option here for the 12-month prepay. If the client elects to do that, you can see what the cost would look like there. Right now, what you're seeing are retail costs, but if they do have an EA and they have specific pricing, we should be able to upload that via API. Now, you can also create groups, right? So underneath this search bar here, and you can use the search bar to search for a specific machine, but here you'll see they're grouped by the virtual and physical infrastructure, but you can create additional groups as well. So if you're speaking with a client and say they have, 10 data centers or 15 different sites or what have you, and you want to create groups so that you can look at the data just by those sites or whatever logical group that you create, you can do that either when you onboard or after the results are ready. You can go into the settings and change some of those groups around so you can see the data as you need to. Is all that clear? Vince, do you think I should be a little bit more specific on the hardware and workload mappings?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
You might demo creating a group or something like that. Or if
that's over in the settings. I don't know if that's here on the demo.
Okay, in the demo account.
When you come to the portal, it just allows you to log in and out. But I can, that's in the knowledge base and everything, and happy to kind of have some additional sessions with people to walk that. walk them through that if necessary. So I'll scroll down here, and you'll see that there's a details table. So there's 4 tabs here: summary, compute, storage, and network. And this is where we're going to get into information about each specific machine, right? And you can download all this information out. So, the results are going to come through the SaaS portal, but we're not going to really hold it hostage in that portal. And as we move along here, I'll show you how you can export everything that you see. So the summary tab is just very simply just going to give you the total cost, annual cost for each machine by adding up the compute, storage, and network. Once we get over to the compute side, you'll see highlighted in blue are all the machines here. And then we're showing the OS and the OS version, what percentage of the time that machine was on, what instance type we're projecting that to. And as I scroll to the right here, you'll see what the bottleneck is, right? And the bottleneck is just the reason we can't recommend a smaller VM within Azure. And there's always going to be some bottleneck, right? CPU, memory, disk I/O, network I/O, number of disks, whatever that bottleneck happens to be, we'll show that there, so that then you can be certain why if your client says, hey, why can't I put this in a, I don't know, standard A or something like, and you say, well, no, because you'll have these types of bottlenecks. From there, you'll see we'll show CPU threads. So we'll say, this is 8 cores that we observed. The instance we're recommending has 4 available, and from there we go to CPU utilization. So we'll show what the peak CPU utilization was that we observed, what that's predicted to be within this specific Azure VM, again, based on the benchmarking that we do. And SLT is service level target. So that's our performance threshold for CPU utilization. That's our best practice. I'll go into a little bit later how you can change that and tweak that if need be. But our default is set at 60%. The reason for that is, that way, if we can get it close to that number, then you have a machine that isn't, very vastly kind of over-provisioned. And at the same time, there's some overhead there if you were to put some load on that machine. Now, to be a little bit more specific on CPU, and this is a good point, actually, to highlight this help button up here. What that will do is, hang on one second. That'll actually start defining some of these values. But I want to speak on CPU utilization here because there can be very short-lived peaks in CPU, right? And we don't necessarily want to provision, if we collect data for 2 weeks, on a peak that maybe only existed for 1 minute or 2 minutes out of that 2-week time frame. So what we'll do from an analytical perspective is actually smooth that peak out over 5 minutes and then take the 95th percentile. So that way we're provisioning for the vast majority of what we see in terms of peaks and valleys, but not necessarily considering something that could be very short-lived or in the 1 percentile or 2 percentile of the data collection period. So a good way to interpret this right here is you'll see, for this particular machine, we're mapping it to a standard A3. We had 8 cores available on-prem, and that was running at 28% at its peak. The A3 has 4 cores, right? And that's going to get them similar performance, about 29.2%. So they don't have to purchase a similar size machine there. And it'd be great if we could get closer to our target of 60%. But in this case, for this particular machine, if we kind of scale down a little bit lower than this on the compute side, we'll have a problem with the number of disks. As I move along here, we'll go to observe memory, and you'll see here this is
hey, Adi.
RAM. Yes.
I just had a question about that number of disks. So the system will, if it understands how many IOPS each disk can handle, right, and each SKU can handle a certain number of disks. So is that what's driving that number of disks?
Correct. Yeah. So we want to see kind of what the storage is looking like, what was kind of assigned to these servers on-prem, and then that's you're going to have those similar number of disks over in Azure, right? We're not looking to consolidate those, so it'll be the same number of disks, and each available VM within Azure has limitations on that, right? So some have You can have 4 disks on this particular VM, some have 8, so on and so forth. So that's why that is there. But we'll take that into account along with disk IOPS and things of that nature as it relates to the compute in addition to on the storage side.
Okay.
Does that help? Okay. So moving along, where was I? Oh, observed memory. So this is RAM. Right, so you'll see what was allocated to this specific VM and what the peak usage was. Now, we never want to run out of memory, right? So there's no percentile here. We're not smoothing any of the peaks on observed memory. We only do that on the CPU side. So here the peak is the peak. So you'll see we had 16 gigs allocated. They really only used 3.5 at their peak, and this particular VM has 7.5 available. So that should be plenty for that workload. From there, disk IOPS will show what's required on the storage side and what's available on the compute side or is tied to the compute within Azure. So obviously if you have a lot of high IOPS, high IOPS requirements, then that'll be kind of mapped to a larger compute instance. So it's important to take that into account because if you just do a one-to-one mapping, right, it can be really hard to find the exact VM that you need because you're not taking that into account. And again, that's automated here within HealthCheck for Azure. And again, moving along, number of disks, what's the minimum required, what's available. From there, we'll give you a little bit of information into the bandwidth here, what the region you're currently in, the pricing plan you're currently in, and what the compute cost is. Now, additional platform cost here at the end is going to be a calculation of what it would cost to run Red Hat on that machine or SQL on that machine. If we see those OSs or applications on those machines, then it will automate what that platform cost will be. So moving along to storage here. Yes.
I would also note that part of your analysis of this data when you're doing your assessment, you need to think through and say, well, if this customer's got an EA and they've already got a SQL license in their EA, then you could take out that cost and just install your version of SQL up in Azure. So you need to take some of these numbers with a grain of salt, but we've broken it out for you so that you know, hey, I need to make a decision here. Do they already own this license, or do they have to go with this SQL version of this that will charge you for the license?
Right, and to kind of piggyback off that a little bit, when you're looking at the summary information and we're showing kind of annual cost for each machine, we're not including the platform cost as a default. We just show the platform cost so that you're aware of what that would be.
So do you include that in the overall cost? The overall green cost that's up there?
No, the annual cost, it doesn't reflect the platform cost as well. So the summary
Okay.
and the total costs are just going to be sans the platform cost. We just show that so that the partners and the clients are aware. And again, because of the reasons you said, right? They might be able to transfer that license. They may move that and decide that should be like a PaaS type scenario, right? So we don't include that as a default. It's just there as a reference so that they have an idea what, if they have to purchase a license, what that would look like. Okay, so I'll move along to storage here. And on storage, we'll show all the disks and their mount points. And we'll show, again, the region and the cost. And we'll show what the capacity is, how much is actually being occupied, and what type of storage we're recommending. Now, this is actually probably the most difficult part about what we do here, right? And the difficult part about trying to find the right storage option, right? Because we have to look at operation size and throughput and IOPS and occupancy and all of these types of things as it is on-prem, and then try and basically see, what's the best fit, what's going to give them that performance that they need at the lowest possible cost, right? And we can just basically, we'll simulate the different options until we find that right best fit configuration, right? And for example, like the operation size on standard storage is, I think, 8 kilobytes, right? Whereas with premium storage, it's 256. right? So there's a lot. That's just one kind of metric where we have to kind of calculate that in order to find that best fit. And then from there, is it how many RAID 0 drives are you going to need? Does it make sense to kind of RAID together more drives to give you that performance, that sort of thing? And then the engine will actually account for all of those variables and then just tell you, hey, this is what you should be purchasing, right? Now, in this case, you'll see that the customer had 70 gigabytes of storage allocated to this particular disk. They're only occupying 33. So, and based on the IOPS information, we're going to recommend standard storage, and we're actually going to RAID together 2 drives at 17 gigs apiece for a total of 34 gigabytes, right? So we're always going to recommend the minimum amount of storage to pick up that workload and move it today, right? If you want to build in some overhead there, you'll have to take that into account. And from there, we'll break down the cost. We'll break down the kind of the annual cost into just what the cost is on the storage side, and then if you're going to incur any additional IOPS cost based on what your IOPS look like in terms of requests, peak IOPS per second, that sort of thing. On the network side, again, as Vince was stating earlier, very simply, we just kind of look at that total number of traffic that we see there, make an assumption that that's all going to go out to the internet, and then give you the cost there. So it's very much a worst-case scenario here, and it's just something to keep in mind. In all likelihood, a significant chunk of that will be internal traffic within Azure and won't be billed. From here, you can actually drill down into each individual machine, right? So this is valuable as you kind of build out your deliverables for your clients. If you want to capture some of these performance charts, if they're kind of curious, hey, how much are you actually seeing when you install these agents? What type of things are you collecting? What kind of granularity is there? When you tell me go buy this, standard D series with premium storage, how did you even determine that, right? So this is where we allow you as partners to kind of really drill down to a very granular level and capture, again, this type of data and the performance charts. So here we're looking at CPU performance over time for this particular machine, Acme Track SQL, and we're looking at daily peaks, and we're showing you what the observed utilization was and what that's predicted to be in Azure on this machine. If you drill down,
could you kind of explain that a bit? So I see an observed of 100 and a predicted of 57. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes. So again, let me just go back. Click the wrong button. Apologies for that. I hit back to all infrastructure instead of back to daily, but there we are. So yeah, the observed is, we're looking at, you'll see the date range down at the bottom, right? So these are the peaks as they were kind of hit daily on the CPU. So the dark blue line represents what was observed, and the light blue line represents what that's predicted to be on the machine in Azure, right? So here you can see, this is a machine that's running much more efficiently in the cloud, right? Because you have, if you scroll down here, you can see on the compute side, you have an 8-core machine on-prem that, and whatever that costs to maintain and purchase, stand up in a colo, what have you, and it's running, at 100% in certain cases, but it can run much more efficiently in the cloud. We can do that on a 2-core machine, right? And it can also highlight kind of the difference there between what that would look like if you did a hardware mapping, right? So if you just came in and said, this server has 8 cores, let me go find that VM within Azure. Well, that's the idea behind the right sizing. Let's actually take a look at this usage and find the more appropriate machine so that, we don't wind up putting it in something that is, again, going to be vastly over-provisioned. And again, these are daily peaks, so you can actually drill down. As I stated earlier, the HealthCheck for Azure agents are actually going to collect every 30 seconds and push out to our machines every 5 minutes, right? And we want partners to be able to drill down to that level as well, right? So here you'll see we're looking at the CPU in those 5-minute intervals, and you can pinpoint exactly like when that peak happened, how long it was hitting those peaks, right? So in this case, it only really happened once, Friday, September 25th, roughly 10 minutes before midnight, right? And as partners, you can kind of have that conversation with your client, right? Like, hey, here's the application inventory. Like, what are you guys doing, on this machine? What's running at the end of the week? What's running at the end of the month? In the middle of the night, right? Like, what's putting the load on this server? Should we account for that, right? Because if you come down here to the compute side, as I mentioned, because this is such a short-lived peak and we're looking in the 95th percentile, our observed peak is only 20%. But as partners, if you find that this is whatever is causing this peak is critical to the business, then you can come in and account for that. Beyond just looking at CPU, you can also come in and look at memory, network bit rate, and then for all of your disks, look at occupancy, IOPS, throughput, operation size, so on and so forth, and then just see, as we're collecting the data, you'll be able to see that graphically represented, and all of that is kind of exportable as well. So here we're looking at IOPS, kind of what the observed read and write is, and what that's predicted to be on standard and premium IOPS. And there's a download button to the right here. So you can pull these images out in a few different formats, or you can download the raw data in CSV.
Hey, Adi, I got a couple questions here.
Yes.
One was, sorry if I missed it, but how is VM data obtained? Is it through vCenter or Hyper-V or whatnot? Yeah, we covered that earlier on, but I might not have gone in enough detail. So while we could only deploy to vCenter, that won't give us all the data we need. We need to be inside on the OS itself of each of the VMs, and you're going to see why here very soon when we get to the migration planner. And it's all about capturing information about dependencies and who's communicating with which processes within the OS itself. So you do install the agent on the OS of the VMs themselves. I had another question here, which was, does your process include mapping to PaaS or just IaaS? You want to take that, Adi?
Yeah. So today, it's just going to map that to IaaS. There is a lot of valuable data there that you can kind of come in and see how that would look, and maybe see if that would be a good fit for PaaS. But mapping that to PaaS and doing the cost estimates there are something you will have to do manually. Having acknowledged that, that is a roadmap item for us. We know that's a big. That's a big priority for Microsoft, so that is in the works. With specifically to Project Titan and what we're going to try and roll out in the next couple of weeks here, that's not going to be available, but ideally next quarter. We kind of have a lot of successes here, and as we kind of renew funding, approach the next phase of the project, at that point, we are targeting to have the PaaS recommendations available.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I would add, don't forget, guys, you can, all of this data can be downloaded into Excel, right? So as Adi was saying, you've got everything you need to make those decisions, right? You know how many IOPS there are and things like that. So you could figure out what it would cost to go to PaaS for those things. We just want to make it easier for you.
Yeah, it's just about making data-driven decisions, right? It's about automating a lot of the discovery, so that as partners you can spend your time actually architecting like a great solution for your clients rather than trying to sort this out in 2D set of interviews and digging through CMDBs and things of that nature, right? That's the idea behind not just this kind of assess portal, but also the migration planner as well. And I'll get to that shortly here. I do want to say that there's some reports available as well, so you can kind of utilize those if need be, or come in, build your own deliverable with their performance tables and exporting all this data out. Now, up until now, the recommendations again have been kind of based on the best practice kind of performance thresholds set within HealthCheck for Azure, and then combined with kind of the benchmarking that's there, right? But you may want to come in and tweak those a little bit, right? So and be a little bit more specific to what your client's needs are. So there is a designer feature available, and what you can do is come in and create a design, and basically run some what-if scenarios. And whether you're looking at all your machines, a group of your machines, or one machine, you can come in and make some changes. Now, whether that's, changing the pricing plan, changing the region that it's currently being projected to, applying discount levels, right? So if if their EA says they just get a kind of flat discount, you can apply that here. Alternatively, we are exploring, just uploading their EA, getting the pricing via API as well. But there's two different ways that you can kind of do that there. From there, you can also tune some of the target CPU threshold. As I mentioned earlier, 60% kind of our default best practice there. But if you see some workloads and you're like, hey, this thing's like really static, not a lot of change happening there, what happens if I put this up to like 80%, right? Does that change the VM that we're projecting into? How does that affect my cost? How does that affect my performance? Similarly, if you just want to change the VM type, for one reason or another, you want to see, hey, you're recommending standard DS11. What if I put it in a 14? How does that affect my cost? How does that affect my performance? Right, that sort of thing. And you can restrict families as well. I know in some regions, looking at D-series or premium storage can actually be cheaper than the A or the basic A's. So if you're aware of that, or you just, for whatever reason, based on your conversations with the partners or what your methodologies are, if you want to eliminate any particular instance families, you can do that as well. Beyond that, there are some other options here. You're seeing coming soon. We're targeting Q4 in order to be able to tune a little bit more specifically and run some additional what-if scenarios. So, for example, we are, as stated previously, we're just showing kind of worst-case scenario on the network traffic, right? But if, we want to get to a place where you can be more specific with that, and similarly tune for memory, plan for load growth, things of that nature. So lots of more functionality that we're working on in that regard. But for now, you can come in and run some what-if scenarios and be more specific. Now, it can take some time.
Yeah, I'd add. Whoops.
Go ahead.
I'd add to that. We have been considering getting a little more specific on the egress, which is really identifying exactly who that's talking to. And then if it's talking to somebody that you're already scanning, then you can assume, and you're going to move those up, that they won't be egress and whatnot. But that would probably add a percentage of CPU utilization on the agent, maybe 1 or 2%. And so I'd, over time, if you guys want to let me know, I'd be interested to know what you think about that. How important is it that we're staying below that 0.5% of CPU utilization? Would you be interested to going up to 2%, or would that be a detriment? So just let me know if you have any feedback on that.
Okay, great. And just moving along here, I do want to touch on the calculations, right? So it can take some time to calculate it if you're changing a few different parameters on 300 machines, 500 machines, something like that. It can take a few hours to kind of actually calculate and project the performance and do all those sort of things, right? But it will run in the background, right? So if you build out a design and you can come back to this portal, kind of look at some of the other data, look at the other performance charts, and the designs you build will be listed here. And the ones that are still calculating, it'll just say in progress. And you can log out, go do whatever else you need to do in the day, kind of come back and look at that and say, okay, are the calculations complete? What do the results look like now based on these what-if scenarios that I've ran? And that's basically that kind of concludes the this assess dashboard portion. Vince, are you seeing any questions that we should address before we should jump over to the migration planning side?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So I'll
you
go ahead
must
and
just
do
be
that
really
here.
well at demoing because nobody's got questions.
That's good. That's good, right? I try to address them as I go along. After you show people a few hundred times, you get an idea what's coming. So, but what you're seeing here is the migration planning application. Now, on the other assessment kind of dashboard, Really, what we were collecting there was just the system-level data, right? And there was a question earlier, hey, like, do we really need the agents everywhere? Can't we collect from the hypervisor level? Well, this is the reason why we need agents, and we push it out everywhere that's in scope of the project, right? Because we can't collect application-level data at that hypervisor level. And what we want to do is, again, automate a lot of that discovery, and the discovery can be very painful, right? It's a lot of interviews. It's, hey, Vince, what application do you own? And, oh, what ports does it call on? And he's like, I don't know. Go talk to Byung, the server guy. And he says, I don't know. Talk to the application guy. And it can be very, very difficult to kind of suss all this out and also be very precise, right? We want to, again, eliminate a lot of the guesswork, your time in Visio, your time in Excel, and just make sure you're getting these topology views, the dependency maps, the firewall rules, and kind of building out these logical move groups. And the idea is you utilize this to get a very sound picture of the environment, how it's communicating, and then building that roadmap to the cloud, right? So it's really showing the customer, hey, this is what's moving. This is going to be phase 1, phase 2, so on and so forth. Now, what you're seeing here are in green, you'll see these are specific machines, and then they're within assets, right? So this is an asset, this is an asset, and it's within this larger group that's labeled SQL migration, right? And initially, what HealthCheck for Azure will do is actually build out some logical move groups based on the interconnectivity the engine sees during the portion when we're collecting data, right? And that's important because we will already start to categorize, right? We have built up, a really kind of vast application library that it can tap into and see, which applications typically communicate with each other. What are those names, right? How can we create these groups initially to kind of eliminate a lot of that work? And there will be some kind of logical move groups right out of the gate, right? So something to keep in mind there. To the left, you'll see those groups as they're created, right? And they'll just be, again, like based on groups of applications, and underneath that, the machines that kind of house those applications. Now, you can create your own groups, move things around, things of that nature, and that's what you're seeing here. As I'm opening these groups, I'm opening these assets, and then I'm coming down to the machine in each group. Now, you can search for a group here in the search bar. The machine names you're seeing here are the machines we're going to pull from the OS, but as I'm sure you know, the OS name may not be the name, right? There may be many DNS names for one machine. So if you search here, we'll actually search the DNS names as well, so you can be very precise. If you're looking for a particular machine and the name differs, we'll be able to tell, hey, you know what, that's actually this machine. The one that you search for is a DNS name for that machine. To the right, you'll see all the applications that live within this environment. As you click on a group or an asset within that group, what will happen is the number of applications that live there get filtered down. And if you click on a specific machine, just the communicate applications in that machine will be populated to the right here. And again, the search bar is here, so you can search for an application. And if you check the box, so here I'm searching for SQL, if I check the box, it'll start mapping out how SQL communicates within this environment, right? And this is, again, kind of, just be very certain as you're moving groups of applications, what are these other pieces that you need to take with you? What are the critical dependencies? So if you pick it up and migrate it, it's not just going to crash on you. And really, again, measure twice, cut once, right? Like let's be very precise. Let's get it right the first time, and let's automate that so there's no guesswork involved, so we know exactly what's happening. Now, as you click on these edges, it'll start telling you what's happening between the two machines, right? So you'll see this particular edge. You'll see the client name and IP address, the server name, the IP address is associated there, and this is IIS worker process speaking with SQL Server, reportal services speaking with SQL Server. You can hit that white detail button, and we'll give you the executable names. Vendor information, process names, and descriptions, anything that's in our application library that can help you better understand what these dependencies are. Now, these images that you see here in the canvas can all be exported. So there's a share button here, so you can pull all of that out into Visio, so you don't have to actually create that diagram again. You're able to pull that out and use that if you're building out these deliverables or building out application profiles for your client, depending on what your methodologies are. You can also, as you click on these groups, you can get summary information. So whether you're looking at one machine, an asset within a group, or a larger group, you can come in and see some of this. There's two kind of areas here, right? There's the application interconnectivity, and then in the summary information for the group will show all the IP addresses that were there, how many machines are in this group, right? And if you're building out these kind of move groups, it's like, well, what other, how many communicating applications are in that group? And if this is, going to be my phase one here, you can go back to that dashboard and say, okay, what's my cost just for this move group? What do I need? What's the cost there just for, based on the business conversations that I've had with the client, based on what we see from the environment with the discovery, as you build out that move group, you can kind of come back and see what the cost would look like there. Beyond that, you can also export out, all the dependencies within that group via Excel. You can see port information, right? Again, this can be extremely painful to try and collect manually or perhaps dig through whatever resources they have collected there. I don't know too many sysadmins who have a CMDB that's updated. So, again, being able to come in and with a click of a button see all of this, with a click of a button download all of this is critical. So here we're looking at inbound firewall rules, and you can see that again by /1624 or the full IP address. If it's RPC, we'll still show you kind of the range of ports it's calling on. You can also see outbound rules, UDP, all of those things that you need to actually, decide like, all right, if I know the infrastructure it should be mapped to, and I know the ports it's calling on, and I know how it should be communicating, then you can go provision that in Azure and have that happen much quicker and accelerate that Azure option for your clients. And it's useful to build out security groups and things of that nature as well. Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, so, and as you guys can see, this is why we're currently working on VM migration, right? It's really painful to do all this stuff manually in ASR. You got to go set up the environment up in Azure. You need to set all this information and whatnot. We have all this information, right? We can feed all this information directly into our platform and then go automate the migration around it for you guys to help you reduce your cost to serve, right? You're still going to charge the customer the same amount of money to migrate, but you're going to make more margin, right? So we've got lots of data to do that with.
Right, and speaking of that, there's other reports, right? So there's dependencies, the port information. Come in and look at, application inventories and download that for these groups that you create, or looking at it, by machines, what have you. CPU usage by application, things of that nature. Or you can hit download all, right? So you don't have to download them individually. If you've created this kind of, logical move group, you can come in, click on that move group, and just say, okay, I just want to pull out all this information. Now, I do want to be clear on kind of what we show and what we don't show, right? So if there's a machine with an agent, but there's a lot of connections coming in from other machines, maybe outside of the scope, but coming in as clients, right? And we don't show that because it's not relevant to migration, right? It could be, Vince checking his email on his way into work or something. Like there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of reasons like clients could come in. But if those machines don't have agents, we don't worry about that too much because, again, may not be critical to a migration. Having acknowledged that, if you're looking at machines that are in scope that do have agents and they communicate out to a server, that is something that's potentially critical, right? And you may not know everything that's there, right? Very few people do. That's the idea behind the tool. And it's not unusual to find shadow IT, old VMs, these types of things. So what we'll do is actually show you and help identify that shadow IT, right? So you'll see here, green boxes are machines with agents, red boxes are machines without agents. And here we just kind of group them by subnet because there's no logical way to kind of group them here since there's no agents there. But if you click on these machines or you click in this group, you can kind of come in and start mapping out like, hey, what's happening with this thing, right? Like, second.
You're filtered on SQL.
Oh, you're right. Sorry. Get out of there. And start mapping this. So here you'll see, here's this machine without an agent, right? And here are these connections going out into these groups and into the machines that we're looking at, right? So if you click on this, you can see what's that process, right? Is that critical to what I'm trying to accomplish? If I'm moving these groups of applications, if I'm moving these groups of machines, what is this critical? Should I go put an agent there? Should I figure out what that is, right? And we'll show you, hey, this is Sun plugin client talking to web server on 443. Maybe that's critical, maybe it isn't. Yeah, but we'll show you the IP address, so then you can identify that, right? And if it's out of scope, maybe it needs to be in your project scope. That needs to be revised so that, again, you can be very precise as you go ahead and migrate these things. Make sure that, that there isn't anything there that you're going to miss just because there's no agent there, or if it was potentially shadow IT that people weren't aware of.
Hey, Adi, I had a question.
Yes.
It says, do you keep collecting data past the 14 days or the software stops?
That depends on the length of the engagement, right? So HealthCheck for Azure is SaaS subscription-based model. If you have very long, if you're hopefully right engaged as partners to migrate 3,000 machines or something, you're going to be at it for a year, and you want to have access to these planning tools and have access to this for a longer period of time, then yes, we will continue collecting data and refresh the results at regular intervals. But alternatively, if this is going to be, and certainly for the purposes of this project, kind of a one-hit, get in there, see what's happening, see what we can do to kind of increase Azure adoptions very quickly. Then at that point, at the end of the 14 days, we will stop the data collection. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you can do that via the portal as well, and there's a Stop All Agents button.
Yeah, so the license that we sell is a 14-day license, right? So, but you could, if you were migrating 10,000 VMs and you knew it was going to take you a year, you might choose to do a longer license. But yes, the license that you're going to be getting is a 14-day license, and it will stop collecting. We are working on a version of this that is more of subscription based. For once you get it into Azure, then you can continue running this on the VM in Azure, and that way you as partners can offer a managed service to your customer around right sizing and cost savings for servers once they're in Azure. So you could charge them a monthly fee per VM to constantly right size, right? If the workload goes down and you no longer need a G4 and you could do an A2, you could easily save the customer, 10x money than what you're charging for that managed service. So we'll hear more about that in the coming months.
Correct. And I just want to come back here and show how easy it is to kind of create new groups, right? So if you're looking at a particular set of applications, you want to move all of those into one group, you can use this Move Interconnected button here and just create a new asset and move that into an existing group, or create a new group so that, if you're looking at applications and they're going across all these different groups and the dependencies are, you're looking at a particular application that may be talking to a lot of different groups, you want to group all those together, you'll be able to do that very easily. So earlier, we were looking at SQL, it was going through, various parts of the environment. You use the Move Interconnected option, and now, it makes much more sense when you're looking at it. This looks like more like a SQL cluster. You can see, this is the central server here, this machine labeled 2008 R2, right? And again, create that group, export that out into Visio, come in here, download all the information you need to kind of build out a profile of that application. There are also global settings here. So, there may be some things that we don't consider as a default, right, just because it clutters up the dashboard and may not be relevant, right? So, and what we'll do is allow you to come in and make changes to those. So you'll be able to see what we don't consider and then see that if you want to. Or if there's applications here that are being considered and for one reason or another you want to kind of eliminate them out of your view at the moment for your purposes, you're able to do so. So, for example, Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, there's no reason to map those out, right? Active Directory, everybody knows you're taking Active Directory. We start mapping that out. You're going to have a million arrows going everywhere. But if you do want to see it, you can come in and do so. And then last kind of piece here are some, hang on here, I'm having a little trouble getting to it. I think my screen share is blocking me, so bear with me 1 second here. There you are. Hopefully that didn't change the screen sharing too much, but okay, cool. So the idea behind these stats are, how do you, if you're looking at 200 machines or 1,000 machines or what have you, and you have all these groups of applications, whether they're the initial ones that we kind of create logically or the ones that you start creating groups for, how do you decide what's phase one? How do you decide what's phase two, right? How do you build out, how do you make that kind of prioritized roadmap to the cloud? Well, I'm going to give you some statistics in that regard. So as you're creating these groups, creating new groups, this will be identified dynamically. So you'll see, or updated dynamically, I should say. And you'll see, okay, here are the number of machines in this group. How many communicating applications are there? How many of those connections are going to servers and other assets? That's very critical. How many connections are coming from clients and other assets? Not as critical when you're thinking about, picking up a group of machines or a group of applications and migrating them. We'll also show, it's not, there aren't any here in this demo environment, but if we find if we find applications that aren't listed in our application library, we'll do a web scrape on those like executable names, right? And if we still don't find information, at that point we'll flag that application as something that is proprietary to that client's environment, a specialized application, that sort of thing. And it's important we identify those because those are the things that will have to be retired, rewritten, refactored, upgraded, those kinds of things before they're suitable to be migrated. And if you can see those types of applications and you say, hey, you guys wrote this thing, 8 years ago, we need to refactor it before, you can even put it in Azure. That's going to take a couple of months. Why don't we move, those applications in this group into, say, phase 3, and then we'll focus more on, maybe your server 2003, which is out of life cycle, and we'll move that into phase 1, right? So it's about providing some of those statistics so that you can prioritize what's kind of going to go first, second, and third. We'll show what's eligible for auto-scaling, things of that nature. Any questions there?
It says there's a question. So then the client needs to be uninstalled afterwards. The client needs to uninstall the agent afterwards. It doesn't automatically uninstall.
Correct. Yeah. We don't open there's no inbound ports open or anything like. And again, in a way, it kind of addresses the security question as well, right? Like we're putting those agents in, but as partners, you'll have the ability to start and stop those. And if the client says, you can show them, hey, I've stopped all the agents. There's no traffic going out. If you need to uninstall those, you can go ahead and do that. Now, that process is the exact same process as installing them, right? If you're looking at a large environment, typically clients with those types of environments have methodologies on pushing software out and uninstalling software on a larger scale. If that's not the case, then we can provide you with instructions on how to do that via Active Directory. You can do it through System Center. We have a tool that will allow you to do that in vCenter. So there's a lot of ways to kind of very quickly onboard into a very large environment, and then those are the same methodologies you would use to uninstall very quickly as well.
Another question: will this provide estimated bandwidth requirements for migration? The data, the raw data is there, but what you're going to see as part of our VM migration is we will actually tell you we're going to tell you based on all this information what the change rate will be, so that you can estimate the needs of ASR and bandwidth and things like that for replication. So hold on to that. You'll hear more on that in the coming months. Is a reboot required on agents install uninstall? No, it's not required.
Correct.
So Addy, tell me. I'm one of these guys that's on this phone, and they kick off this assessment, and they come in 14 days later to this dashboard. What's the first thing that they're going to do to start thinking about putting together, a recommendation and an assessment for the customer? Where do you go first?
Okay. I would start with kind of over here on the dashboard side, right? And with this data that you'll see here in terms of OSs that are running and SQL that's running. So right now, we will show where SQL is running and on which machines. It's not here in the UI, but it is in the Excel download, right? So I'll pull that up here, and you'll see this is kind of the table. If you download out of the UI and HealthCheck for Azure, this is the information that will get pulled up here. And again, I might have to tweak my window here so you can see the tabs underneath, but you'll see, here's your summary, compute, storage, network tabs, and then in the summary, we're showing you again, you look at 50 machines, well, which one's running Server 2003, right? That's end of life cycle. That's not going to be supported. It can be very expensive to kind of maintain these types of machines. And similarly, come in and see where SQL is, right? Where's SQL 2005? That stopped being supported. I think it was June, right? So you want to find these type of work. You want to find the machines and the applications that are no longer supported, because those are prime candidates to be kind of moved to Azure today, right? So I would start there, and then from there, getting back into a little bit on the past recommendations as well. You can tie this into that as well, right? So you can see, hey, well, here's this SQL that's out of date, but let's look at the rest of them as well, right? Like, what else do you have here? Can we potentially do all of that in Azure in a PaaS model, right? So those are a couple ways you can look at it from like a quick hit standpoint. And then from there, I would suggest kind of going over to the migration planner, right, and looking at the application, looking at your application inventories and the logical move groups that are going to be created just automatically right when you can kind of in day one go in and see that, right? So just see what the groups look like, right? See what the logical move groups look like today, and then you want to have a conversation with your clients. Again, like it's a planning tool, right? We're not completely automating the migration plan. There is going to be some work that, as partners, you'll have to do to speak with your clients and have a conversation around like kind of what the business drivers are, right? Like, are they planning on increasing users to a particular like kind of production application that would be really suitable for the cloud because it's easy to scale, right? That could be an application group that you look at and moving. Do they have to evacuate a data center or a colo by a certain deadline? Now those are the machines you want to look at. Similarly, if there are other applications that are kind of reaching that end of life cycle, there are a lot of kind of ways that you can kind of slice and dice the data. But for me, I think the quickest way to look at that is you start with the things that are out of life cycle, the things that can move, and then you come back here to the dashboard and you see, okay, what are the groups of applications that we see that we have as as default that are grouped logically, right? Then come into those stats with cloud readiness and suitability and see, okay, out of these 15 groups, how many of these have the least amount of connections going out to other servers? How many of these have no proprietary specialized applications. Guess what? You can pick up those groups of applications and move them with little to no trouble, right? And if there's a group with one connection going out to another group, then maybe you move those two groups together, right? So it's how to kind of interpret the data that you see and combine that with a little bit on the knowledge that you'll have about your clients to kind of quickly prioritize, which applications can go without it affecting the rest of the environment.
Yeah. So, but with the tight time frame that we have to, for the goals of this program to immediately get some, $1,000 in consumption, right? So a POC, I would think that you'd probably go after, dev test machines,
Yes.
that can fairly easily be moved. As far as a POC goes, I would also probably go after those machines that don't have any interdependencies. Can you show me how to find the machines that don't have any dependencies?
There's always going to be some, right? And that's the idea behind us. That's the idea behind the analytics engine, kind of grouping them logically. So it's not necessarily the machine. It's more like these group of machines which are communicating together and can be moved together. So if you're coming in and you're seeing like, hey,
but you could
go ahead.
You could go to the processes, highlight the entire thing, click on all processes, and then see if there's any machines out there that are not communicating under any of those critical things, right? And those might be low-hanging fruit to go get some immediate consumption, especially those machines that are compatible with ASR and Azure, right? Because those are pretty easy to get moved, right, without breaking any other things. And then I would probably come back around and look at things that may be small groups of servers. One of the things you have to consider with the end-of-life servers is, are the applications that are running on an end-of-life as well, right? So if I move a 2003 server and it's running an app that won't run on 2012, right, then now there's a bigger thing to worry about there. So these are all considerations that you need to take into, that you need to think about when you're doing this.
To add to that, DR is something that's great for a quick hit as well, right? So if you're looking at kind of 2003, Server 2003, SQL 2005, Dev Test, DR, that now like between those four, and say, another question to ask is, hey, do you have any gear refreshes coming up, right? If you're planning on buying 50 servers, well, it's much better to pay for that on a month-to-month basis in Azure and turn it off if you decide you don't need it, right? Or auto-scale them. With those five, I think you'd be very well armed to kind of come in, look in that, ask a couple of questions to the client, come in, and I'd say Server 2003, SQL 2005, Dev Test, DR, and then if they have any machines that are just, need to be refreshed.
Yeah, and remember, on the SQL 2005 and even SQL 2008, we've got a tool that'll analyze that database, take a copy of that database. It'll automatically upgrade it and move it to Azure so that you could point your apps to it and test against it to make sure it works under a PaaS model. So you could do that as well.
Correct. Yeah, and I mean, if the target is $1,000 a month in spend, I mean, we can get there pretty quick, right? If you're looking at, you go into an environment, you look at 50 machines, 100 machines, you should be very easy to identify, a handful that are right candidates. If you have the right priorities going in and you're looking for, again, that low-hanging fruit, what can be picked up and moved right away.
Yeah, and you can and how much it's going to generate, right? So you can use those in consideration.
Exactly. Exactly.
I really like the DR idea. I mean, it's harder to get to $1,000 with DR because it's only $50 a server. but it's an easy sell, right? I mean, a really, really easy sell to do ASR replication with the, to put some things under DR. Okay, I had some other questions.
Okay.
Which Linux distributions are supported? What is the installer type? tar, GZ, RPM, etc.
I'd have to. That's in the knowledge base. I don't know off the top of my head exactly which releases are supported, but I know it is in the BitTitan knowledge base where we show, hey, these are all the versions of Windows we support. And again, we go back to 2003, and then we show all the versions of Linux that are supported as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like if you want.
So
I don't have that
for those guys,
but if you want me to kind of pass off the screen share and you want to pull up the KB, I know I'm pretty sure you guys have it up.
Yeah, so it's just folks, just go to community.bittitan.com and you should be able to get it there. Okay, does it highlight servers that will not work in Azure?
Yes. So on the dashboard, if you come in and we will, like, there'll be an error message, right? You'll see it. It'll be in red. As you look at these individual machines, here in the instance type, it'll say kind of in bright red, warning, no suitable instance type available, right? And I have to look into a little bit more if it gives you that directly in the bottleneck, or if you kind of have to look at some of that performance data and sort of suss it out a little bit, like, they have a machine with 40 cores or something, and there's just no fit within Azure that will be a good fit there, right? That'll match that from a performance standpoint, and those will be machines that would obviously have to stay on-prem.
Well, 2003 won't run in Azure yet. It's got a standard DS1 as recommendation for it.
Right. Because like that, there's that comes with I don't know what Windows license is coming on there, but it assumes that'll be upgraded.
Okay, so what you're saying
when
is you're looking at it from a hardware perspective.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. It'll see it from a hardware perspective and see if there's no match in Azure that's going to give them that performance that they need. There's some very large machines out there in data centers, right? And then I think if it can't fit in a G5 or something, from a hardware perspective, if it's not a good fit, we'll show that. But from a software standpoint, then we don't show that because, generally speaking, you can always upgrade that unless you're looking at like a proprietary application, but that's more on the planning side. But yeah, to answer the question, we will show on the hardware side if there's no appropriate configuration within Azure.
Yeah, but again, you can always download the Excel. Right, you all know what the requirements for OS are in Azure, and so if you're looking just from a quick hit POC, I just want to ASR this thing up there real quick, then you could filter out the ones that are that aren't supported from an OS perspective. Okay, I have a question. Actually, I got to put on my glasses. Hold on. What's happening when you have an active passive cluster? What's the best approach?
You know what? That's a tough one for me to answer. But I can get with some of our teams here and kind of circle back on that one. That one's kind of a toughie for me.
Okay. No worries. We can. Let's see. Was there anything else? Nope, no other questions. Okay, so we've got some time reserved just to kind of answer additional questions. So anybody that has any questions, I highly recommend you put them in now. We've got all the experts on the phone, and then on that topic, I think what we'll do for this program is we'll open up an office hours maybe once a week for you folks that you guys can join to ask questions, because I think seeing a demo is one thing. Actually getting your hands on your own data and then going through it is another. So we will send out information about that as well.
Yeah, and Vince, one thing, I don't know if you're aware, but we're also working on is we're going to come up with some, just like a slide deck that'll go through like the workflow, right? Like, okay, now you have your results. This is how you move through it, and this is how you kind of like find those groups and move those groups. This is how you interpret that data, so that obviously, like there's a lot of great documentation on how to onboard, and then we can kind of do these, have like a results delivery call. You've seen us kind of go through it, but what we want to do is also have some additional information there in the knowledge base that will just say, like, how do I kind of create this move group? How do I find this? How do I find this quickly, right? And we'll release some documentation around that within probably the next week.
Any other things you think we should demo while we're waiting for questions?
Let me go through it here. I think we've gone through most of the features and things of that nature. No, we've really touched on everything.
Okay. So if you guys need to get a hold of us for this program, you can email HealthCheck for Azure at BitTitan.com. So that's H, C as in Charlie, F as in Frank, A as in Alpha, at BitTitan.com. Also, love your feedback. What do you guys think about this? Is this gonna be valuable for you guys? What features would you like to see in the future? Things like that. So definitely reach out to us and let us know. Okay, just another question. What are your thoughts on migrating a HPC on-prem server to Azure?
HPC is difficult, right? So I don't know. I'm not like I'm more of an expert on kind of this portal rather than kind of how HPC could potentially run in Azure. So I don't know how much I can speak on that. But in terms of how to look at HPC, that there needs to be some additional functionality, and we are exploring that. But the way they run jobs, and it's they don't even talk about applications; they talk about jobs, right? And I'm running 70,000 jobs or 100,000 jobs a day, and that sort of thing. And how do you really suss out the dependencies when you're running these kind of jobs over and over and over? So that's something we're exploring. But right now, if you kind of install these, it's tougher to do that on the HPC side. So for the purposes of the program, if you're talking to a client and they have a bunch of kind of physical machines that are kind of running HPC type things, I don't know, doing like genetic testing or something like that, where they're just kind of testing the same things over and over. Like, I would stay away from those, and then maybe focus on the more kind of traditional applications and VMs. Like, stay on that side of the environment, because today it doesn't really support those type of HPC workloads.
Thanks, you. Okay. If there's no other questions, I think we can go ahead and close this out. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and look forward to winning a lot of business together with Azure.